Most people think retirement is decided the day they stop working. They believe everything important happens before that moment: the savings, the planning, the numbers on paper. But what many retirees eventually discover is that retirement isn't decided when work ends. It's decided in the first 5 years after it ends. Those early years quietly shape everything that follows: your finances, your health, your mindset, your relationships, and even how long your money lasts. And the truth is, two people can retire with the exact same savings and live completely different retirements based on how they navigate those first few years. I've spent countless hours reading stories from retirees who looked back and realized that the beginning mattered far more than they expected. Some described those years as confusing, emotional, and surprisingly fragile. Others talked about how they slowly found their footing and built a foundation that carried them comfortably for decades. What separates the two isn't intelligence or luck, it's awareness. It's understanding that those first 5 years are not a victory lap. They're in a transition period, and how you move through them determines almost everything. One man shared that when he first retired, he felt like he had finally crossed the finish line. Decades of work were over, and he believed the hardest part was behind him. But within the first year, he felt unanchored. His days lacked structure. His spending crept up without him noticing. He wasn't unhappy, but he wasn't settled either. Looking back years later, he said that the choices he made during that unsettled period echoed through the rest of his retirement, both good and bad. Another retiree explained that the first few years felt like learning to walk again, not physically, but mentally. Work had defined time, purpose, social interaction, and routine. When that disappeared, everything else had to be rebuilt. Those who rushed this process often found themselves drifting. Those who slowed down and paid attention built something stable. The first 5 years of retirement are when habits form: spending habits, health habits, emotional habits. Once those habits settle in, they become surprisingly hard to change. A woman on a retirement forum shared that she didn't realize how much her daily routines would define her later years. She fell into patterns early on without thinking much about them. Some were healthy, others less so. 10 years later, she found herself wishing she had been more intentional at the beginning, when change would have been easier. One of the biggest misconceptions about early retirement is that it's all freedom. In reality, it's also uncertain. Without the structure of work, people often struggle to answer simple questions like what their days should look like, how much they should spend, or how active they should be. Those questions don't always get answered consciously. Often they get answered by default. And default choices tend to stick. Financially, the first 5 years are especially powerful. This is when people establish their withdrawal habits: how much they take, how often they take it, and how emotionally reactive they are to market changes. A retiree once said that early on, every market dip felt like a personal failure. He reacted emotionally, adjusting his spending and investments constantly. Over time, he realized that his anxiety, not the market, was doing the real damage. He wished he had learned to stay calm sooner. Spending behavior in the early years often sets the tone for decades. Some retirees overspend without realizing it because they're celebrating, traveling, or compensating for years of delayed gratification. Others underspend out of fear, denying themselves comfort even when they can afford it. Both extremes usually emerge in the first few years and become ingrained. One woman described how she spent far more than planned during her first 3 years of retirement. It wasn't reckless, but it was unstructured. She said yes to everything because she felt she had earned it. By the time she noticed the impact, her spending habits were already hard to unwind. It took years to rebalance. Health decisions made early in retirement also ripple outward. Many retirees believe they'll naturally become more active once they have time, but time alone doesn't create movement. Habits do.
Those who intentionally build routines around walking, stretching, or social activity early on often maintain better health long term. Those who drift into inactivity often find it difficult to reverse later. An older gentleman shared that he assumed retirement would make him healthier automatically. Instead, without a routine, he became more sedentary. It wasn't until a minor health scare years later that he tried to rebuild habits he wished he had started sooner. He said the first years were the easiest time to set those patterns, but he didn't realize it then. Social life is another area shaped early. Work provides built-in social interaction. When that disappears, connection must be intentional. Retirees who actively maintain relationships, join groups, or volunteer in the first few years tend to stay socially engaged. Those who withdraw early often find isolation creeping in quietly. One woman explained that during her first year of retirement, she enjoyed the solitude, but as years passed, the quiet turned into loneliness. She hadn't invested in new connections early on, and rebuilding later felt intimidating. Looking back, she realized how critical those early efforts would have been. There's also a psychological adjustment that happens during this time. Identity shifts from being defined by productivity to being defined by presence. That transition isn't always smooth. Some retirees feel a loss of purpose. Others feel relief mixed with guilt. How those emotions are handled early on often determines long-term well-being. A man once wrote that he struggled deeply in his first 2 years because his sense of worth was tied to his career. He didn't talk about it, assuming it was something he should just get over. Eventually, he found meaning through mentoring and hobbies, but he wished he had acknowledged those feelings earlier instead of ignoring them. The first 5 years are also when people learn how retirement actually feels, not how they imagined it would feel. Expectations meet reality. Some dreams adjust, some priorities shift. Those who give themselves permission to adapt tend to thrive. Those who cling to rigid expectations often feel disappointed. One retiree said she expected retirement to feel like an endless vacation. When it didn't, she thought something was wrong. It took time for her to realize that retirement wasn't meant to be constant excitement. It was meant to be sustainable contentment. Once she accepted that, everything changed.
Decision fatigue can also be intense early on. With no set schedule, retirees suddenly face dozens of small decisions every day. When to wake up, what to do, how to spend time. That mental load can be surprisingly draining. Those who create gentle structure early often feel more grounded. A man explained that once he started giving his weeks a loose rhythm, certain days for errands, certain mornings for walks, certain afternoons for hobbies, his stress dropped dramatically. He wished he had done that sooner. Emotionally, the first 5 years can amplify unresolved feelings. Grief, stress, or dissatisfaction that was once masked by work can surface. Ignoring those emotions doesn't make them disappear. Addressing them early often leads to a healthier retirement experience. One woman shared that retirement gave her space to finally feel emotions she had pushed aside for years. It was uncomfortable at first, but working through them early allowed her to enjoy later years with a sense of peace she hadn't known before. All of this is why the first 5 years of retirement quietly decide everything. They set patterns that shape finances, health, relationships, and identity. They are not just a beginning, they are the foundation. And the good news is that awareness alone changes outcomes. Simply knowing that these years matter allows retirees to move through them more intentionally. As the early months of retirement turn into years, something becomes clear to many people, even if they can't quite put it into words. Retirement doesn't slow life down on its own. It simply removes the structure that once held everything together. What replaces that structure is entirely up to the retiree, and whatever fills that space in the first 5 years tends to stay there. One of the most common patterns that forms early is how retirees relate to their time. Time becomes both abundant and slippery. Without deadlines or schedules, days can blur together. Some people find this freeing at first, but over time, it can create a sense of aimlessness. Others instinctively build new rhythms that give their days shape and meaning. Those rhythms often become permanent. A retiree once shared that during his first year, he woke up whenever he felt like it and drifted through the day. It felt relaxing at first, but after a while, he noticed his mood slipping. When he later established simple routines, morning walks, regular meals, set times for hobbies, his energy and outlook improved dramatically. He said the biggest mistake was assuming structure would appear on its own. Financial behavior continues to take shape during this period as well. The way retirees respond to their first major expense or market downturn often defines their long-term approach. Those who panic early tend to stay anxious. Those who adapt calmly tend to trust the process. One woman described how her first unexpected home repair rattled her confidence. She questioned whether she had retired too early or miscalculated. Instead of stepping back and assessing calmly, she cut spending aggressively and pulled money out of investments. Years later, she realized that a single reaction had long-lasting effects. She wished she had paused instead of reacting. Spending patterns also solidify quickly. The first 5 years often establish what feels normal. If spending is high early on, it becomes psychologically difficult to scale back later, even if circumstances change. If spending is modest but comfortable, that level often feels sufficient for years to come.
Another retiree shared that she consciously lived below her means during her first few years, not out of fear, but out of curiosity. She wanted to see what she actually needed. That experiment gave her confidence. When she later chose to spend more on travel and experiences, she did so without anxiety because she knew her baseline was sustainable. Health routines formed early tend to persist. Those who make movement a natural part of their day early in retirement often continue doing so effortlessly. Those who postpone it, assuming they'll start later, often struggle to begin at all. A man on a forum wrote that he spent his first few years enjoying rest after a demanding career. He told himself he deserved the break. By the time he wanted to become more active, he found it physically and mentally harder than expected. He wasn't criticizing his choice, but he acknowledged that starting earlier would have made everything easier. Mental health follows a similar pattern. Retirement can bring relief, but it can also surface anxiety, sadness, or a sense of loss. Addressing these feelings early through conversation, reflection, or professional support often prevents them from deepening. Ignoring them allows them to quietly shape behavior. One woman shared that she felt guilty admitting she was lonely after retiring. She had always been independent and capable. By the time she acknowledged her feelings, isolation had already become her default. She said reaching out earlier would have changed everything. Social patterns are especially fragile in the first 5 years. Retirees who intentionally maintain connections often keep them for life. Those who withdraw early sometimes find it difficult to rebuild later, not because people are unavailable, but because habits of isolation become comfortable. Another retiree explained that during his working years, social interaction happened automatically. After retiring, he assumed friendships would continue the same way. When they didn't, he felt surprised and disappointed. It wasn't until he made an effort to initiate plans that his social life stabilized. Purpose is another area defined early. Many retirees underestimate how important a sense of contribution is to well-being. Hobbies help, but feeling useful often requires engagement beyond oneself. Those who explore volunteering, mentoring, or creative projects early often find a lasting sense of fulfillment. A man who retired from a leadership role shared that he felt adrift until he started mentoring younger professionals. He didn't expect how meaningful it would be. Looking back, he said those early years of searching were necessary, but he wished he had started exploring purpose sooner. There's also the issue of comparison. In the early years, retirees often compare their experience to others. Some appear constantly busy, others seem endlessly relaxed. Comparison can create unnecessary dissatisfaction. Those who focus inward and define success on their own terms tend to find contentment sooner. One woman said she spent her first year feeling like she was doing retirement wrong because she wasn't traveling constantly. Over time, she realized she preferred a quieter life. Once she stopped comparing, her enjoyment increased dramatically.
Financial confidence also builds or erodes during this time. Early successes, even small ones, reinforce trust. Early mistakes can undermine confidence if not processed properly. How retirees interpret these experiences matters more than the experiences themselves. A retiree explained that after a few years of steady finances, he stopped worrying about every decision. That confidence made him calmer and more patient, which in turn improved his financial outcomes. The first few years had taught him that he could handle uncertainty. The physical environment also plays a role. Retirees who adjust their living situation early, whether by downsizing, modifying their home, or simplifying maintenance, often reduce stress significantly. Those who delay these decisions sometimes find them harder to make later. One woman shared that maintaining a large home became increasingly exhausting. She wished she had downsized earlier, when the move would have been less overwhelming. Once she finally did, she felt immediate relief and wondered why she had waited so long. The first 5 years are also when retirees learn how much rest they truly need. Many swing between extremes, doing too little or too much. Over time, they find balance. Those who listen to their bodies early tend to age more comfortably. A man wrote that he initially filled his calendar with commitments, fearing boredom. He burned out quickly. When he later allowed space for rest, his enjoyment increased. He realized balance, not busyness, was the key. All of these experiences highlight the same truth. Early retirement is not about getting it right immediately. It's about paying attention. It's about noticing what works, what doesn't, and adjusting before patterns harden. Mistakes made early aren't failures, they're signals. The retirees who thrive are often those who respond to those signals with curiosity rather than fear. As retirees move deeper into this phase of life, change becomes less theoretical and more personal. Health shifts, relationships evolve, priorities reorder themselves. What surprises many people isn't that change happens, but how differently it feels once work is no longer the anchor of identity. Without a job title or career ladder, change can feel more exposed. There's no familiar structure to absorb the shock. This is where the mindset formed in the early years really starts to matter. Retirees who learn to see change as something to work with rather than resist tend to adapt more smoothly. They don't panic when plans shift. They adjust expectations, reframe goals, and keep moving forward. Those who cling tightly to how they imagined retirement should look often struggle more when reality diverges from the plan. One retiree described how he planned to travel constantly, but unexpected health issues made long trips difficult. At first, he felt robbed. He had done everything right and still felt disappointed. Over time, he shifted focus toward local exploration, shorter trips, and deeper experiences closer to home. He said the moment he stopped fighting reality was the moment retirement started to feel rich again. This flexibility shows up financially too. Markets change, expenses appear unexpectedly. Inflation quietly alters assumptions. Retirees who treat their plan as a living document rather than a rigid blueprint tend to feel calmer. They adjust withdrawals, spending, or timelines without seeing it as failure. There's an important psychological shift that happens here. Instead of asking, "Am I doing retirement correctly?" they begin asking, "Is this working for me now?" That question is powerful because it keeps retirees present instead of locked into past decisions.
Another often overlooked change is how retirees relate to money emotionally. Early on, money can feel fragile, like a finite resource that must be guarded closely. Over time, for many people, that fear softens, not because money becomes infinite, but because experience builds trust. They see that markets recover, that expenses fluctuate but rarely spiral uncontrollably, that life continues even when numbers don't behave perfectly. This lived experience does more to reduce anxiety than any spreadsheet ever could. One woman said that after 10 years of retirement, she stopped checking her accounts obsessively, not because she didn't care, but because she no longer needed constant reassurance. Her money had proven itself reliable, and so had she. Relationships also evolve in unexpected ways. Some friendships fade as lifestyles diverge, others deepen as shared time increases. Couples, in particular, often discover new dynamics once they're together more often. For some, this closeness strengthens connection. For others, it exposes differences that were previously hidden by busy schedules. Retirees who communicate openly and renegotiate roles tend to adjust better than those who assume everything will naturally fall into place. A couple shared that during their first years of retirement, they struggled over small things, how time was spent, how decisions were made. Once they acknowledged that retirement was a transition for both of them, not just a reward, things improved. They learned to treat it like a shared project instead of a finished achievement. Identity continues to evolve as well. Without work defining success, retirees begin to measure life differently. Progress becomes less about accumulation and more about alignment. Days are judged not by productivity, but by satisfaction. This shift can feel uncomfortable at first, especially for people who spent decades tying self-worth to achievement. But over time, many find it liberating. They begin to value presence, relationships, and peace more deeply. A former executive said that it took him years to stop introducing himself by his old title. When he finally let it go, he felt lighter. He realized his value had never been in his position. It had been in who he was all along. This reframing often leads to a surprising outcome. Contentment increases even as external markers of success fade. Retirees report feeling richer in time, calmer in mind, and more grounded in daily life. And this is where the original question quietly resolves itself. How do some retirees start with $600,000 and end up with $2 million? It's not magic. It's not aggressive risk-taking. It's not constant optimization. It's patience. It's spending less than expected because priorities change. It's avoiding panic during downturns. It's letting investments do their work instead of interrupting them. It's living a life that naturally costs less but feels more meaningful. Most importantly, it's staying flexible, financially, emotionally, and mentally. Retirement rewards those who don't rush it, those who allow life to unfold, adjust as needed, and resist the urge to constantly interfere, often find that both their money and their well-being quietly grow over time. As the years pass, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. Retirement stops feeling like a phase you entered and starts feeling like a life you're living. The urgency fades, the questions quiet down. The constant self-checking of "am I doing this right?" slowly dissolves into a quieter confidence. This is where the long-term effects of the first 5 years fully reveal themselves. Retirees who built calm habits early often describe a sense of steadiness later on. Not excitement in the loud sense, but a deep inner stability. Their days may look simple from the outside, but inside there's clarity. They know what matters, they know what doesn't,
and they trust themselves to navigate whatever comes next. One retiree said something that captures this perfectly. He said, "I stopped trying to make retirement impressive. I started trying to make it honest." That shift changed everything for him. Honesty in retirement looks like accepting your energy levels without guilt. It looks like spending money where it genuinely improves your life and letting go of spending meant to impress no one. It looks like resting without feeling lazy and staying active without feeling pressured. Financially, this honesty often leads to better outcomes than expected. When retirees stop chasing a lifestyle they thought they wanted and settle into one they actually enjoy, spending naturally becomes more efficient, not restrictive, just aligned. They cook more, they waste less, they buy fewer things that end up unused, they travel more intentionally instead of impulsively. Over time, these choices compound quietly, just like investments do. And while markets continue their cycles, up and down, these retirees aren't reacting emotionally anymore. They've lived through volatility. They've seen recoveries. They understand that short-term discomfort doesn't define long-term outcomes. This emotional maturity around money is one of the most underrated advantages in retirement. Younger investors talk about discipline. Retirees who've been through real market swings live it. They don't chase headlines. They don't compare their portfolio to others. They focus on sustainability, not optimization. That calm approach often leads to fewer mistakes, and fewer mistakes matter more than perfect decisions. There's also a growing awareness of time, not in a fearful way, but in a clarifying one. Retirees become more selective. They protect their time fiercely. They say no more easily. They invest energy where it actually returns something meaningful. This selectiveness brings peace. Social circles may be smaller, but they're deeper. Conversations become more real. Relationships feel less transactional and more genuine. There's less tolerance for drama, obligation, or noise.
One woman said that retirement taught her the difference between being busy and being fulfilled. She had spent most of her life confusing the two. Once she saw the difference, she never wanted to go back. Health, too, becomes less about chasing perfection and more about maintenance and respect. Retirees who built gentle routines early tend to age with fewer surprises. Not because they avoided illness entirely, but because they noticed changes sooner and responded calmly instead of reactively. They walk regularly, they eat simply, they sleep better, not out of strict discipline, but because it feels good to take care of themselves. This self-respect compounds just like money does. Emotionally, many retirees report a surprising sense of gratitude. Gratitude for ordinary days, for quiet mornings, for conversations that aren't rushed, for the ability to choose how they spend their time. This gratitude doesn't come automatically. It grows from awareness, from slowing down enough to notice life instead of racing through it. And again, this traces back to those first years. The retirees who allowed themselves to slow down early didn't feel like they were falling behind later. They were already living at the pace that suited them. Those who tried to replicate their working lives in retirement often took longer to arrive here. Some never fully did. That's why the first 5 years matter so much. They set expectations. They establish emotional patterns. They teach you how to relate to time, money, and yourself without external structure. They quietly decide whether retirement feels like a constant adjustment or a natural unfolding. By the time retirees reach the later chapters, those early habits are no longer conscious decisions. They're just how life works now. And this is where the full picture becomes clear. Retirement doesn't reward intensity. It rewards consistency. It doesn't favor perfection. It favors patience. The people who thrive aren't the ones who planned every detail perfectly. They're the ones who stayed flexible, stayed calm, and stayed kind to themselves. They didn't rush to define retirement. They allowed it to define itself over time.
If there's one truth that keeps emerging from the experiences of long-term retirees, it's this. Retirement is not something you master, it's something you grow into. The first 5 years are not about getting everything right. They're about learning how to listen to your life without the noise of work telling you who you are. Once you learn that skill, everything else becomes easier. Money lasts longer, stress carries less weight, time feels richer, life feels fuller. And perhaps most importantly, retirement stops feeling like the end of something and starts feeling like a deeper beginning. Not louder, not faster, but truer. That is how the first 5 years decide everything.